that. Look, let's move on and talk about religious discrimination. Where did you think this all landed at, Kerry? Quite a few issues and people speaking up after the first one. I think quite a few groups are satisfied, but certainly not everyone after version 2.
Yeah, and you're not going to get everybody happy about this, about a bill which talks about religious discrimination and freedom of speech. It's just not going to happen. The bigger question will be whether they can get it through the Parliament. So I'd be curious to see what the Labor Party think of this version, because clearly the coalition, I would have thought, in large measure, would probably want to get this through in as bipartisan way as possible, mainly because it really, both the Liberal Party and the National Party and the Labor Party have a conservative base in a large respect. You know, we forget that sometimes. The Labor Party has quite a conservative religious base as well. Coalition, you know, people always think about them being conservatives, but there are quite a few people who are conservative on the Labor side. I would have thought making sure that we could get a negotiated bill supported by both sides of the House, which addresses in largest part the concerns that people, but continues to maintain the rights of, for example, employers. And I declare an interest in that, as you know. I have not spoken about and won't talk about on this program, but I have been involved in a lot of the Folau, matter, and I won't talk about it because I can't. There's a confidentiality agreement. But I do think we need to be careful about the rights of employers to actually manage their workforce in an appropriate way as well, including around religious expression.
Just on that, Kerry, I'm not asking you to give away any of your confidentialities, but this new law, if it were to pass as is, how would that actually apply to the Folau situation?
I'm not going to make any comment one way or the other. I would be in breach of, you know, all the agreements if I gave you an opinion on what happened or what could happen in the future in relation to that particular matter. So no comment. Nice try, but I'm not going to talk about it.
I'll put this to you. I don't quite get what would happen, Simon Banks, because at this stage you've got the Folau clause, which means an employer of $50 million turnover or more can't restrict opinions of an employee, i.e. Israel Folau, if they're not in their work, if they're not going about their work. But if they can prove they would suffer financial hardship, they would. So if he tweets and a sponsor says, we're pulling out, couldn't they still say, you're sacked? And this thing doesn't actually address what he was going through?
Clearly that's quite possible. And, you know, I mean, I think people see this through the prism of Israel Folau. And I've got to say, I think within the broader Australian community, because we do come from, I guess, a more Christian background, there is some sympathy, obviously, for Israel Folau, even if people don't necessarily support his religious views. I think bear this in mind, that this could be a comment from someone well to the right of another faith, someone of Muslim faith or someone of Jewish faith or someone of no faith, for that matter, who nonetheless expresses a view within a religious context. Some of these views could be quite troubling within workplaces, and this is why a lot of employers are actually quite genuinely...
When you say within workplaces, so they tweet something not while they're working, and then people see it on social media and that upsets people. Is that the sort of situation?
Well, it depends upon the context in which something happens. I mean, obviously we accept that someone has the right to say and do something, for example, when they go to church. I mean, for example, when Israel Folau made his comments that I thought were very unfortunate about the bushfires a couple of weeks ago, he was doing that in the context of conducting his faith. I don't think you can necessarily assume that just because someone's going on social media that they're doing it in a strict religious context. They're very much putting it out there in the public domain for all to see. They do have work colleagues, and I've got to say, you know, like if Folau's
so that where you draw the line, if it's within a church, but you can't just, you'd consider...
Well, what is religious freedom?
Well, you're expressing a view.
You're entitled to express your view in the practice of your faith. The question is, at what point do you move outside your religious faith? At what point are you at work or not at work?
Well, that has been clarified.
For public figures like this is
so do you
a complex
disagree with
issue,
the definition
and Kerry
of
can't talk about it, but that
when you're at work or not?
That inherently was one of the issues that was in issue in that case. It's far more complex, as I said.
What do you think? Okay, Kerry, I'll stick away from Israel Folau because I can tell where we're going to get on that one. What do you think of what's being given out now as the example? Let's see, you've got one or two doctors, one or two pharmacists in a small town, and they both want to refuse the morning after pill or family planning services to someone, and they find themselves having to drive, you know, a couple hundred kilometres to get that particular service, that could be an issue. Does that present a problem for the government?
No, well, I actually think on that basis, you know, those things done discreetly and, you know, between patient and doctor, and the doctor explaining why it's against their beliefs to do that, and then facilitating a referral to someone who could help, I think that's acceptable. I mean, I do actually think that's acceptable.
Even if someone's got to drive a couple of hours to get that done?
I get that. I absolutely understand that. But as I said, facilitating a referral and perhaps doing whatever they can to make it as easy as possible for that person to get that service, I get that you know, the doctors should be allowed to do that, because I do think that for a lot of people, you know, those sorts of services are very fundamental to them in terms of, you know, their beliefs and the way they practice their religion. But, you know, the number one thing here I would stress to you is that these things need to be done discreetly. They need to be done in that context between a patient and their doctor. They don't need to be done on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald.
Where do you sit on that particular issue?
Well, again, these are very complex issues. I mean, I agree with Kerry. I mean, we already do acknowledge, for example, that doctors have a right to personally not engage in a particular procedure.
It's an interesting carve-out, isn't it?
Because of their religious
it's a vital service and it's government subsidised.
But we also say, because let's understand this is not just about the religious faith of the doctor, it's also about the religious faith of the patient. And if we ultimately believe in religious freedom, we believe in the religious freedom of both of those people. So should someone be denied a basic public service simply because their doctor is of a particular religious view? And that's where the issues of referral, for example, are important. And we need to think very carefully in those sort of small country town type examples about how those things are managed, because otherwise you are quite genuinely denying someone not only a basic service but their religious freedom at the same time.